Hey everybody, welcome back. I am Emily Moyer. This is Strange Mosaic, and we have an awesome new guest today that I'm very excited about. But before we do that, I just want to remind everybody that if you are watching this on the Off Planet Media YouTube channel, please also go over and subscribe to the Emily Moyer YouTube channel. All of my work appears there, and it'll always appear there first. And now let's get on with it. All right, so as most of you know, I love doing dot connecting of all sorts, but I've been fairly hostile to anything Q related. I've been interested in things like some of the points from Tartaria and issues with time travel, but I've been hesitant to go down any of the Q rabbit holes because I don't like the Trump is wonderful, he's going to save the world narrative that's attached to it. But when I'm being honest to my tracking and pattern matching skills, if some things pop up that I have to acknowledge, then I have to acknowledge them, even if it's taking me into territory that I'm hearing danger, danger, don't go here, you're getting caught in a trap. I have to go and take a look. And the person's work who sort of brought me to a place where I'm willing to consider something that I had sort of cast off as ridiculous before was this gentleman who's with us today. He is the host of Radio Tartary, now Radio Kitai, Victor Bugge. Is that how you say it, Bugge?
Yeah,
Bugge.
that's a long way in terms of American pronunciation of my name. Yeah, very good, very good.
All right,
Yeah,
Victor Bugge, welcome to Strange Mosaic. Nice to see you.
thank you very much. I'm excited to be here. I love how this isn't, this is a little more sensitive because like you haven't gone into the Q stuff yet, and here am I trying to, bring people to it from another perspective. So it's exciting for me because I haven't done this before, trying to go into other pastures because I've been, with my people and we have been, isolated because I knew that what I was doing was a little bit, controversial even for our community, right? But I think that I'm ready to lay it all out now. Yeah, so here I am.
All right, awesome. Well, I'm glad to have been sort of, it doesn't seem like you've done too many other interviews in alternative media, so I'm glad to have kind of snatched you first because regardless of whether the Q thing is a nothing burger or the total something burger, your pattern matching skills, your ability to recognize things that seem disparate but are very connected is undeniable. So if it isn't, if it doesn't pan out in this stream of data, I'm sure it will pan out in others. So I'm super excited to make your acquaintance anyway. Before we get started, I just want to ask you kind of what's going on where you are. That's kind of been something I've been doing with everybody on this show lately because we talk to people from all over the country and all over the world. You're not an American, even though you say you are by heart.
Yeah.
How is it living where you are? Like, what is going on there?
Denmark is this ultra liberal country. We could call it like Hillary Clinton country. Like they all love her. Like the media is just, repeating CNN. It's really, as a like objective study into propaganda and just following a bigger dog and what it's really interesting, Denmark. It's because it's just like a banana state in that sense. I love my fellow people, but they're a little bit on the slow side when it comes to standing up for your rights. They just accept no Second Amendment rights. They think it's ludicrous that people should have guns, and it's there. So it's at that level, and it's tough sometimes to be on the other side of that spectrum, even though I'm an educated philosopher. So I don't always I'm not that binary in terms of left and right. I always try to be more centered and just look for what do I think is the best argument, and irrespective of left and right. And this Q thing started out for me as I got this impression that it was all right,
Mhm.
right side of the aisle. And I thought that for a while until I really went into the Q drops, and then I saw what Q was posting in terms of left and right, and I found all these drops saying that this is not about politics, this is not a left and right issue, it's a truth issue, it's an awakening issue, it's a middle pillar issue was what I got from it.
Ah.
And I thought to myself, middle pillar, well, middle pillar in astrology and symbolism is Saturn. So I thought to myself, well, is there anything particular Saturnian about Q? And that was where it all started. And I knew Saturnian symbolism pretty well from having listened for years to Santos Bonacci, but also particularly a woman called Lavette on YouTube, who's really a powerhouse in astrotheology, and she really taught me the hidden sides of Saturnian symbolism. It all started with me gaining an understanding of how Saturn was being smeared and how everything was flipped in terms of everyone thinks Saturn is Satan, everyone thinks he's the god of human sacrifice, when it's actually the other way around. He has an enemy on the heavens that mythologically is known as one who smears Saturn, smears Saturn's name, and that is Jupiter. Well, not to go too much into that, because most people think that Jupiter is the good guy on the heavens and Saturn is the bad guy, when it's really the other way around. But before we get to that, that was what it started with me, how I got started into Q. Then I found out that Q had all these elements within the code, how Q was saying to people how to react, like how to think about certain things, because he doesn't really, or her, we don't know, right? They don't, tell us what to think. They pretty much tell us to apply logic, and they ask questions that lead us somewhere, of course. But as many conspiracy theorists, people already could see that these codes were leading to something that was substantial. That was just initial discussions whether is this mind-blowingly new, revelatory. And for a lot of people, it wasn't. He was talking about Rothschilds and Clintons. Like, that was low-level stuff for many people. And I thought so too. But when I really started to see the events unfold and how it was a military operation, some of you may not have, gone into that yet, but I saw that, and then it all started to click for me in terms of apply logic and think strategy and think awakening. This is not for the awakened people, and it suddenly dawned on me that this thing, because it was doing the way it was doing, it was going down in the level in terms of high level conspiracies and such. It was much more detailed in terms of who pays who is organized with who, and how do they move the things around. It was much more detailed in that sense. It was more in line with how intelligence officers would think in the field. And that initially attracted me to, okay, so maybe because they're dumbing it down, it has to do with them wanting as many people to wake up to these things. And it was they started to label themselves as not as an awakening project, but more as a communication operation. It was a communication between military back channel to the civilians out there who were able to learn their communication sets and codes. And people know that about Q out there. So what is it that I am bringing to the table? Well, I've been engaged with Tartaria research for a while. I laid off all the human trafficking stuff, all the Pizzagate back in 2017. I had had enough, and it was wearing me down. And I went into Tartary when that blew up, because I saw that with that research, it was more positively tuned towards amazing things, new discoveries. We were feeling like little children again, and that's in that sense. And I was big on the community from the start. I saw Martin Liedtke blow up, and I started going into the archives, and just I spent 2 years every day, like even when I was doing something away with the family, or every day I went into archives and looked at stuff. I just looked up a random word I thought could have some meaning to something, and then I just took it from A to C. And I did that for 2 years, and that was 2 of my most incredible years of research. And I found stuff that I wasn't expecting to find. I wasn't looking for X, Y, and Z. I just found amazing stuff. And so it felt like you were digging as an archaeologist, not knowing what you were going to find, but you always knew that where you were digging was, you're going to find something. And I found something every day, and I could send something to Martin every day. So all this Tartary research was just blowing off. And then in 2020, just before the pandemic pandemic, right? Um, just before that, I started to, I don't know exactly how it happened, but I just started to feel differently about Q, and I saw um, the news stories that got me was when Trump took charge over the Treasury. Bless you. When I saw that, I thought, holy hell, that is the biggest financial news story ever, like ever since like in our lifetime. And only Yahoo News is like bringing this story, and only in like 2 lines. And I was thinking, that is odd. Like, that is really odd. Why aren't the MSM coming out and attacking this? Like, oh, Trump is taking charge over the Treasury. Like, they should be able to spin that somehow, but they didn't. They just left it. Um, and I thought to myself, holy hell! Like, this was even predicted by Q. You know, he said like 2 years ago that the Treasury is going to play this role, and Trump was going to take it over. And then I found my first really, really big confirmation of the narrative that Q put out. And that started it all for me. And whilst I was doing that, I was researching Tartary with the radio. And so what happened was that in one of my radio shows I was doing with Ben, my colleague, and he was sending me a lot of stuff. And then suddenly this people appeared called the Q Celts.
Mm-hmm.
So these Celtic people, you know, we all know about Celts, but looking really at how they designate different types of Celts, we found out that there were these Q Celts and these P Celts. And then I saw in the Q code that Q was saying that they're saving P for last. So I thought Q and P, and then I thought to myself, logic. Well, the two most commonly used letters as exemplary of formal logic is Q and P. If P, then Q. And all these P's and Q's things started to I just saw them everywhere suddenly, and I was thinking, holy shit, I need to put this into the narrative. I had to look up the letter Q and look for Tartarian symbolism and Saturnian symbolism. And when we did that, Ben and I, it just started to unfold. Like, when we started to look for it, it was everywhere. And it started to really weird me out, because like, why hasn't people seen this? Like, why are we the first one to notice these things? And Ben's theory was that, well, everyone hates Saturn, so they're not going to see this. Maybe. But we saw that, and we brought it out in the shows, and it started to evolve more and more around Kennedy and Trump. And I started to look at their ancestry, and I found out, well, they're both Q Celtics people, like really strongly, like Q Celts. Not P Celts, but Q Celts. And I thought, well, it all fits. And then we looked into Tartarian links, and we found that JFK and Trump had been harping on Tartarian symbolism for a while. Like, there's a photo of JFK just before he dies where he's feeding a deer wearing red slivers. Well, that's of note. But that deer is something, the deer theme is something that has played throughout the Kennedy clan political life. They were, I think JFK Sr. was gifted 2 spotted deers by some hotshot from Asia or something. And that was some really Tartarian stuff going on, because the deer in Tartarian symbolism, you may have seen all these Siberian shamans. They always wear the deer crowns, right? So the deer is massively symbolic for the Tatars, as well as the horse and as the sand owl. And these 3 things was something that the Kennedys were really big on. And they were even, they had the dogs of Camelot. Well, Camelot is Arthur. Arthur is completely Saturnian symbolism. It's an embodiment of a Saturnian avatar. And Trump is an Arthurian knight. They're both from Scotland. Scotland history goes back to Scythia. Trump's Turnberry Lighthouse in Scotland on the golf course is literally a repurposed lighthouse, as we would research it in the Tartaria community, like an old castle. And on that castle, they made a lighthouse after the mud flood era. And Trump bought that. And it's basically like this whole castle is a story about how they repurposed a mud-flooded castle that belonged to an ancient Tartarian king in Scotland that gave Scotland independence. So Trump wanted to have that symbolism around him, and no one has really talked about it. There were only a few Twitter handles that was pointing people in that direction, and they were doing that anonymously and without overtly doing it. They were giving hints. They're like, look at this lighthouse. If you don't understand the lighthouse, you're not seeing it clearly yet. There's something really big here. And it dawned on me that whatever Trump was doing with this Turnberry lighthouse was to show us, the Tartarian research community, that he knew everything about that as well. That was my first idea, like, okay, so he's been following the Tartary research, or he's trying to tell us something about it. And then I looked at the news stories. Well, then they called him the Tartan Trump. And Tartan literally is a word that comes from Tartary. It means, well, etymologically goes back to Tartary. So they were calling in the news headlines, they were calling Trump Tartary Trump. So I was thinking to myself, holy hell. And then I went into to look up his ancestry more. It was not only Scottish, it went back to Rurik, the king of Kiev in the 8th century. And this line ruled Muscovy Tartary for 700 years. So that means that Trump's ancestors, pure ancestors, ruled Tartaria. Is the same ancestors as Putin. He has the same blood. And in 2012 or 13, Putin was seen on TV. Maybe it's a little bit after. Putin was seen on TV with Tartaria maps. That was the first time in, I guess, ever perhaps on TV that maps of Tartary, the empire, was shown. So Putin, he spearheaded that. And knowing their blood relation, knowing how they've been, seemingly been not the best friends, but yet then again a little bit good friends. It's hard to pinpoint their relationship, but they share blood, and they both know that they share blood, and they not only it's pretty strong. It's not that far removed from each other, and all of this Tartary stuff that's coming out, and Trump is clearly showing people, for those who see that, or for those who can see that, he's harping on this Tartarian thing. And only a few people are going to be able to recognize why that is important. So it's not something he's doing to, sell himself, I think, because that's not going to be a good sell. Cost benefit is a little off there, and no one has really noticed it. So I think he's really trying to let us know that he's all about the Tartary. And for me, that was massive, because I thought to myself, Tartary, it represents everything Trump is talking about. World peace, represents multiculturalism, just like America is like a melting pot. It represents true freedom, because what we found in the research was that all the American founders, especially Jefferson and Franklin, they were all Tartarophiles, meaning that they all loved Great Tartary, and they were keeping it secret amongst themselves. Benjamin Franklin he had the bibliography of Genghis Khan, all the Khans, as one of the only guys in America at the time that he had it. And he had it copied and printed and sent to all his fraternal brothers. And Jefferson, he wrote in his memoirs, I think it was, but he has written it somewhere, that were it not for Genghis Khan and the philosophy of the Khans, and was it not for Great Tartary, America would never have had a concept of religious freedom that comes from Genghis Khan. Religious freedom. So that was the idea of how the empire worked. People have talked about Tartary as an empire, as a sovereign state. And it is, but they haven't been able to pinpoint the exact form of rulership it had. It's very specific form, something we have never seen in our lifetime, but still something you can find. It's called a suzerainty. It's with a C, Sucerainty, suzerainty. And it's not a sovereignty, because it's not a full-blown sovereignty. It is kind of like it, but a suzerainty is like an over-feudal state. That was Tartary. And it had no vassal states as such. It was not controlling them 100%, but all their foreign affairs between other countries and members of the trade union, that would be handled by Great Tartary, the over feudal state. But the internal disputes and the internal affairs of every, let's say, underlying state was handled by the own state with their own sovereignty. So it was like the over feudal state was a world police in the true sense as America has sold itself today, just in a very counterfeit way, right?
Yeah.
But it was a true world police. It would uphold true freedom, religious freedom, everybody, as long as their great law, which was natural law, wasn't broken, everybody was free to do what everybody wanted to do. And that's what we want on the international level. And Great Tartary were able to have a system like that, where it was more like a trade union more than it was an empire. But there was an overarching authority, which was an entire country with citizens as well. And I find the concept fascinating, like truly fascinating in terms of history, in terms of politics, in terms of what Nisara could really be and where it could come from. Like the idea of Nisara and Jisara, I believe strongly that it is just Tartary they're trying to bring back.
Okay.
That's why all the technology in Nisara is so hugely important. All the patents of Tesla,
yep.
And how Tesla's father was a Tartarian priest, more or less. It all fits together, and how Trump and Tesla and John Trump, the technology aspect of it is just screams Tartary. And a lot of people had noticed that. For instance, I remember Martin Liedtke mentioning it. Like, that's pretty Tartarian. Like, also like how Trump, he said like in 2018, everybody thought he was joking when he mentioned airports in the 1700s in America, right?
Mm-hmm.
But literally all the Tartary researchers was going, like, what does he know? And then I got the confirmation, like, he does know. He may be the entire reason why Tartary blew up back in 2017 and 16. I don't think it's unreasonable to think that at this point, but you may want to go in and watch some of my stuff before you take that on, just having listened to me now, right? Because I could be bullshitting you, but I'm not.
Okay, before we go further, there's a couple of things that you hit on that I kind of wanted to dig out a little bit deeper. Can you just, I know none of this is easy to explain quickly, but can you explain to people who are they and what is the difference between the Q Celts and the P Celts? And then I'm going to explain to you something interesting I found about them that I don't think maybe you've gotten to, but I'm not sure. So go ahead.
Okay, interesting. Okay, well, the Celtic people, they all come from Tartary, like this. They say the Aryan birthplace in Asia. That may be a little bit incorrect. Well, that's the story. And these people had to, because they were growing too numerous back in Tartary, some of them had to migrate to Europe. Those who did that first were the Q Celts.
Okay.
What they overtook Europe, they built all the cathedrals, they built all the star forts, and they befriended, well, it's not true with all, sorry, because there was a Moorish people living there already in Europe. They befriended the natives, and they were living in peace and harmony. That is where you get your Basque people, I think is kind of a mix of the Turanian and the ancient Moorish stock of Europe. And that's also where you get all these tribe of Dan migrations from Bulgaria and up to Scandinavia. It's this Q Celtic migration that came out of Tartary. The P Celts, they came centuries after, and they were a little bit different. They're described that the Q Celts are more described as being taller, more blonde, more reddish, sometimes even brownish. They were like perhaps the old giants. And the P Celts were a smaller stock. They're ancient brothers coming from the same place, but they were different, and they had grown different after their brothers had migrated out of there. What they did was, on their way to Europe, well, roughly, was that they made friends with the papacy.
Okay.
or the beginning priesthoods of the Jupiterian cults that wanted their peace in Rome. Because back then, Rome was not called Rome, it was called Saturnia, and was ruled by Q Celts. And they had a temple of Saturn on the Capitoline Hill, and now they moved it to another hill because Vatican took it over. So the Q Celts and the P Celts, they're opposed not only in their languages. The Q Celts, they retain the letter Q, the pronunciation of Q in their languages, most common consonant in their language. And the other ones, they rejected Q. They revised everything that had to do with the k sound.
Yeah.
And they made it either into a P
Yep.
or an L or an S or a C. So it seemed to me at the start that the P Celts had a disdain for the Q Celts because they wanted to do away with everything the Q Celts had done, especially in the language. And they teamed up with the papacy, and they made war. The P Celts and the papacy made war against Arthur, who was a Q Celt. And it's the same story with, the early Romans making wars against the Druids. That's the P Celt versus Q Celt thing. Not told in that way, but if you're looking at the stock of the people and taking it back to Tartary, that's a way to index the fight, let's say. And I also say it's the same deep state versus white hat war we're seeing right now. The ancestors of all the deep state players, the big ones, are P Celts. They're these Farnese, Persian, papal families, Orsini, and then you have the Q Celts opposing them. And those families are more unknown, semi-less known. Some of them are big. I would say Colonna family is one of them, and that's why there's been this feud between the Orsini and the Colonna family before. But not to get too much into every detail of all of this. But yeah, the P Celts and the Q Celts.
Okay.
Different in their stature, and they were opposed to each other, made wars against each other.
Okay.
But
so
they were anciently brothers.
I'm glad that you, so a little earlier in the conversation, you had said the word etymology. So I knew you were a person that looked at language, because when Jeff started coming to me with your work, there's one particular thing that maybe we'll get into in the second hour that was the first thing he brought to me that kind of got me paying attention. And then the next thing was this Q Celts, P Celts thing, right? And when I went looking into it, we found a very interesting research paper about the language, right? This woman is a language, what was kind of, she's a linguist, right? And she was tracking this replacing of the Q with the P, right? That basically the story she told is like, it wasn't anywhere near as detailed as what you said, but has some of those same components. And she said basically hers was, though, a split happened with this split in language, that one portion, one faction just rejected the Q and replaced it with the P. And from there, the cultures of these two factions of what had once been the same tribe seemed to begin to diverge immensely. And it all stemmed from language. They have different ideas of gender, technology, like all sorts of things, but that, and this is something sometimes hard for people to understand, but anyone who's done significant research into mind control knows how important language is in mind control, that the printing press was really the first advancement towards like MK Ultra style mind control, right? So just changing one letter in a language can completely change the trajectory of a culture or a society. And that seems to be the big, it sounds crazy to say that like a war that has gone on for centuries started over the changing of a letter, but that's actually in some ways exactly what it is, right?
Yeah, but yeah, and exactly, she's right. It started with language. Like when looking at it like that, objectively, it started with the language. I asked myself, but why? Why did they have to reject the Q? Right? Why weren't the Q people interested in rejecting the P?
What's your
Why
thoughts
was
on
it
that?
only the P Celt? What?
Do you have a theory on why that would be?
Yeah, it was because the P are the Phoenicians.
Okay.
And the Phoenicians, they are a vindictive people. Like everywhere I read about them, what they say about other people is that they held. Well, I maybe have to backtrack a bit, because I was telling you about how the P kills and the Q kills were anciently brothers.
Okay.
Well, you have the 13 tribes of Israel, which would be a mix of P and Q in this sense at that time, back in the day. Then something happens. There's the curse of Ham, with the story of Noah. And there's the cursed 13 tribe. There's one of the tribes that is not behaving according to natural law, and they want out. They want their own system, and they want their own type of people, and they want their own genetics. So what happened, I think, was that in Persia and around the Caspian Sea, a lot from the line of Shem and a lot from the line of Ham were being mixed to create their own hybrid. Because through the hybrid, they had no real roots. They were a mixed identity. So it was easier for the P-Celtic elite back then to form the Phoenicians. This was when the Talmud came out, and that was essentially what it was.
Yeah.
It was to form a new identity for this new breaking free from natural law. This is Prometheus breaking through the chains. Like, they don't want Saturn's chains. They don't want that boundary of natural law, so we'll do away with it. And they thought they were the chosen ones because they were different. They were unique. Everybody rejected them, right? Like the other brothers, they didn't want to kill them because they knew natural law. So what they did was they forced them out into the desert, much like in the biblical narrative, right?
Yeah.
And they were made to wander. And they became the wicked wanderers that never slept because they were forced into living nomadically. But that's a little bit too rough as well. But because of that, the Phoenicians and the P-Celts, they learned shipbuilding. They took to the seas. They rejected the lands. They saw that their ancient brothers were masters of the land. They were masters of the horse. What they could do was trick and deceive and use the seas, where their ancient land brothers weren't as big. And it was all according to the astrology. Like, these people were Piscean fish people. They were Jupiterian Phoenician people, so they loved the sea. And their ancient brothers were earthbound constitutionalists in that sense, and God-fearing people. They were earth and air, much like Saturn is. So you see how the Saturn and Jupiter conjunction is something that is always going to set the stage for the power plays in the world. And you can see how the enemies of any conflict will either be Jupiter and Saturn when it comes to the conjunction. And the conjunction is coming up this year, as many of you guys know, the winter solstice. And it's the first time in a long time that Saturn is going to be the one that's overtaking Jupiter. So that's why it's the big event. That's why astrologers such as Levet has been talking about 2020 before 2012. She knew back then that 2012 was not anything. She could read the heavens and saw there's no conjunctions of any importance. Then she fast forwarded 8 years, going through the Ethiopian calendar, which is 8 years out of sync. She fast forwarded and saw 2020 and saw all the numerous great astronomical events that's taking place, and especially the very unique one with Saturn overtaking Jupiter on the solstice, while also having Pluto there, and it's on the solstice. So it's like it's the biggest event on the heavens in like perhaps 1,000 years, and this is this year. So that is why I am so strong in my conviction that the Q narrative is going to be forced forward now. Like, we're living in the weeks where it's gonna happen or not gonna happen. Like, there's only gonna, like, after Christmas, if people are still having doubts as to whether the narrative is coming into fruition, then I'm also ready to lay it off, because it has to be now. It can only be now. It's the script in the heavens. It's always going to be like that. It's always been like that. And I think that is why Q has come out 2017, just is preparation for the conjunction. And that's why it's so heavily Saturnian. And that's why the Jupiterians, they hate it. And that's why all my symbolic decodes centers around Saturn and Jupiter and how to see that dichotomy, because it is a true dichotomy. What makes it complicated is that the Jupiterians' MO is to mirror Saturn, so they will play a false Saturn, just like Satan masquerades as an angel of light. To confuse, the Jupiterians masquerade as Saturn much like the Nazis would use the ancient swastika and associate bad actions to it, and then flip it as well. That's what the Jupiterians do all the time. That's the only thing they do. It's their ultimate magical ritual. It has to do with patricide. They have, like Freud, the ultimate Jupiterian pedophile out there,
Yeah.
the master psychologist that wants to normalize it, right? He was studying like these tribes in, I think, Africa, and he noted this patricide rituals where it was about killing the firstborn baby or killing of the father, the restrictive father. And a lot of these tribes were like cannibalist tribes and weird tribes. And Freud, he said that was some sort of tribal instinct to act like this. He was being very selective, right? And so it's all about this patricide rituals for these Jupiterians. They want to make Saturn appear bad, evil, or they want to outright mock him. And they love it when people such as us say Saturn is Satan out of this very this singular phonetic similarity. It's the only thing they really have on it. Yeah, because when you really dig into the alchemical symbolism, you can see that nothing of the sort is true. Like Saturn is the ruler of the golden age. Saturn was the ruler of the spirit. Saturn instituted law and order. Like Jupiter has nothing on that. Jupiter, like if you read about Zeus, who is Jupiter in Greek mythology, Zeus was the big pervert. He fucked everything. He didn't care about other people's laws. He was pretty aggressive. He had a fiery temper, and he would punish people, not always fairly. Like that's the story of Zeus, and that's why the Vatican, they love him. Saint Peter is Zeus, Jupiter. If you look at South Park, you'll see they even say that Saint Peter is the White Rabbit. It's pretty full on. Like, wow. Yeah. So follow the White Rabbit. That is Saint Peter. That is Jupiter. That's the White Rabbit, and it makes sense, right? Like I posted in my threads, like, don't act surprised. Like, we know you all knew we were going to the Vatican eventually, but to say that Saint Peter and the first Pope was literally the White Rabbit, and also you can go back in history and see that is just mind blowing. That hasn't been a center of focus yet, like because it's so obvious, and everybody's gonna accept that when they hear it because we all know about the Vatican. Even my sheep parents do. So yeah.
Okay, couple of things there. So real quick, back to the P and the Q, right? Because you said because they're the Phoenicians, right? And so like one trick, like this group of people understand the power of language, right? And so by replacing Q with the P, it creates a different vibratory pattern in the cathedral, which is the roof of the mouth, and into the brain of people who speak that. So it starts to reformat their brain for how they understand language and how they understand reality. And from the way you're describing the Phoenicians, I think we all understand the modern iteration of what you're talking about here. And if you pay attention, these people are in control of our media and in control of our understanding of reality. So I think like they had to take it all the way down to the alphabet to begin building an entire historical narrative where people's frequency was out of kilter from what it once had been. Does that sound reasonable to you? Okay. So
well, it sounds spot on.
Okay. So
way better than I explained it.
Okay. So then the next thing I sometimes have trouble reading my own language, right? So, and it's making me think about, because, you know, one of my criticisms of Q in the beginning had been that, like, whenever anybody brought up the issues with Israel, they were just like, we'll deal with that later. Now, if I'm going to just jump out of my, like, my sort of hostility towards Q and say, okay, well, if they have to explain on a certain level some of the history of this before they explain how that is presently represented as the problematic group of people that Israel is represented by now, that makes sense on a certain level, right? Like, you can't just start off screaming that Israel is the problem if the problem is complicated to understand. So I do get that. Then you said something about Q being forced forward now, right? And we're seeing a forcing forward in the last several weeks like we haven't seen before, with Bill Maher talking about Q, with all these people. And I see them doing the exact same thing they did with Pizzagate, right? They're talking about the absolute stupidest aspects of Q, period, right? The one that is like designed to make everybody look stupid. You know what I mean? And also just like even for people, like whenever somebody sends me something that is like, oh, you have to look at this thing about Q, right? Because they want me to get onto the Q train. It's always the dumb shit about how, you know, Tom Hanks's Madonna's typewriter, or Tom Hanks's typewriter, or Hillary Clinton's going to be arrested next week, and all of this kind of stuff, which I've just known from like years. I've been doing this shit for a long time. The politicians and the celebrities are not going to be arrested. That is not really how this is going to happen. You know what I mean? And so whenever I feel like people's attention is being directed to that, it's a savior program. It's a waiting for somebody else to do something, all that kind of stuff. But in some ways it might be okay for that noise to be up there, because meanwhile you're able to be down here doing this other stuff. They want people to think Q is the other thing so that they don't think it's what you're talking about. And that's why they're feeling this need to create a narrative about Q that everybody will sort of write it off offhand, because the media that is pushing it are those Phoenicians you're talking, this version of it are those Phoenicians you're talking about. Okay. And then the last thing I wanted to address, and then we'll go back to you, was you were talking about this thing with patricide and killing of the firstborn, right? And one of the things I've noticed, because, you know, the machinations change over time, right? And you don't see maybe quite as much of this patricide as you saw back in more historical times. But what you do see is a lot of firstborn children being sold into child trafficking, being sold into satanic ritual abuse, being the child of the family that might be involved in MK Ultra kind of experiments and things like that, right? So it is a certain kind, where a lot of these activities that you're talking about are associated with these people, like cannibalism, like all this kind of stuff, that all occurs in that environment. So it's sort of they found a better use for the people than just to kill them or to sacrifice them or whatever. And that was to simultaneously do that and continue to use them for other things, like the ultimate in recycling, not wasting anything, right? And I've heard they're very efficient. I heard you talking about this the other day, right? They're experts in effectivity, right? They don't just kill for the adrenochrome. They want the cerebral cortex fluid, the teeth, all this kind of stuff. It was wasteful to just to kill and just discard of them, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how they think.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a method to the madness, right? And that's always been the hard part to get to. Like, how do these people truly think? And I think, like, what I'm getting to in the end, because I'm being led most of the times towards these conclusions, which sounds crazy and dangerous to many people, I know. But I am being led by anonymous people who sent me the most impeccable stuff and act stupid about it afterwards, which is really weird.
Yeah.
But
that's actually very smart. Very smart. Yep.
Yeah. But that's how I get most of my data. The best data points I've gotten has been from most of these anons, and who I love dearly. But I'm piecing it together, right? They cannot do that for me. And it's really, what was it that we wanted to go into? How you were on about something just before. I lost my thread now.
We talked about the vibratory patterns of the P versus the Q, pushing Q forward now, right? Like, talked about the, you know, Phoenicians as the current day issue with Israel, and then we were talking about
about effectivity. Their effectivity, and how they want to not waste anything. That's definitely an MO I'm seeing, because the more deeper I go into it, I see how they want to use the plasma, they want to use the blood, and this whole Gulf Gate Cemex thing that I based a lot of the Q drops on and created was about how they also use blood of people, not only children but also adults, to strengthen cement, and possibly also to put egregores into buildings, possibly. So the blood acts as a binder and also as a feeder for the entity for a while, so it can live there and enact certain magical things. Like something I always noticed was that in courtrooms, when you walk in there, you'll see paintings and you'll see like marble columns, and you really pay attention, and try to get out of the pareidolia thinking. I think you'll be able to see egregores in a lot of the architecture, like small little faces, entities, certain things like that. It's definitely things I've seen before. And I think it has to do with the blood and the cement thing. And that's what Cemex is most likely involved with, besides the just plain old selling children. I think it's specifically about plasma, putting plasma and blood into cement brickwork to strengthen it. It's something that's actually found in world history. Like the London Bridge had to be put human sacrifice into the bridge, otherwise it wouldn't hold. That was the idea. It was to stabilize it and strengthen it. They used human blood. There's even patents from the 50s going into the 60s and 70s and 80s about how they could use blood in the most effective way to strengthen concrete, which is pretty fucking crazy. Like they talk about using pig blood and cow and whatever, but when you know these people, like, we talk about eating meat as well, right? And some go the whole way to eating humans. Like in the same sense, some talk about using pig's blood in the cement. Some Satanists might think, let's use some humans because we're sick fuckers, right? So already there, you can say, of course, that would have been an idea from some sick Satanist at some point. And then also, apparently, it was also useful. So that's a 2 and 2 for these people. So of course, they're going to do it when it's useful. And they're probably going to think ritualistically about, sacrificing people, because that's what they do. And to me, it seems also quite impersonal about, the sacrifice. Like, even if they were to sacrifice something that all the members hated, they would still be quite impersonal about it, I think. Yes, we're just sacrificing you. Okay, are you going to be quiet about it? Like, they're quite impersonal about it. Like, it's a way for them to just have their religion. It's normalcy to them, and that's what it's hard for us to put our mindsets in. It's also normalcy for them to have this divide where we cannot tell them these things, and there's this you can know the truth, you cannot know the truth. It's also normalcy for them, and it's very easy for them to walk in that system, because you cannot tell people these things either way. So it keeps itself secret, right?
It's impossible to believe, and so you don't even have to work hard to try and hide it.
Exactly. So that's also why they grow, arrogant and ballsy, in terms of they don't fear you. It's something Q says repeatedly. They don't fear you. They show their symbolism openly. And Q has also said something that was quite remarkable, because in all of this, Q was talking about indictments and putting them to jail. But Q always said, in terms of their real downfall is coming from symbolism, not from being put into jail, but symbolism will be the real downfall. And always made me think a lot, like, why is symbolism, like, really just symbolism? Is that the necessary and sufficient cause to bring down the whole deep state? Well, okay, well, if he's saying it, let's try and roll with it and see what we can find. And what I did was only focus on the symbolism. And then I went into the Cemex and the golf stuff, and, well, I'm not even done. I don't even feel like I'm 10% done with all of that. And I've created 3 Twitter threads now that perhaps it will take like 4 hours to read through, like all of it. And it just keeps on going. Like, it's truly mind-blowing how this map of symbolism Q is also talking about. He talks about learn to read the map and build the map. And it has to do with this map of symbolism that they use. It's really, really consistent, as we have already seen with, Pizzagate. But when you really go down to like the big codes, the backbone of the structure, it's not the restaurants that's the backbone of their structure. That's an added bonus for them. The backbone of the structure is golf courses, ports, cement concrete factories, and the churches, and also the big infrastructure lines like big waterways, train stations. Those are the real backbone industry. That's their organization. That's how they organize the traffic. So that's the most important thing. And the codes used in that section of their ball game is different. And people haven't looked too much into it, well, mostly because people weren't thinking that it could be that organized or that, extensive, all of this, but it truly is. And I went into the golf stuff and the cement stuff, and I created these Twitter threads, and it led me to this certain Q code that was talking about stringer. It's like this thing that's known in Q that's called stringer. It's like 10 drops that's talking about stringer, which is, from what I could find, is a freelance journalist, a stringer is, and they are ordering the citizen investigators to look at this AIDS video Obama has made. And that all came out of the cement and Golfgate thread that I made. And I was thinking there's a link between cement and golf. And Q has talked about it and hinted towards that, and no other researcher has picked up on it. Here am I, trying to find the new gate, like Pizzagate, Merfergate.
Everything has to be a gate, yeah.
Yeah, it has to be a gate, because Q also talks about doors, like gates and doors, and how POTUS is going to open a door, the door of doors. And I think that has to be like a gate, like a pizza gate, or and I'm thinking now that the golf gate scenario is going to become part of the narrative eventually, because Q has said in the drops about golf that it's not important yet, but it's gonna be. And that means that, well, I've already broken that gate, explained it, how it fits together, even with all the symbolism. And it led to these posts with Stringer that's talking about looking at this AIDS video Obama's made. And it seems to me that Q knew that someone was going to break out this Golfgate thing through these threads or through these Q posts. And when that was done, that guy or the people who knew that or found that was going to re-see those codes and find that Q was also talking about this AIDS video that Obama had made, and how that was all going to tie into what you have already decoded. And I spent some time looking for this video, and I thought it was something that might be coming in the future. Like, now you've done this, so this is going to come, and you're going to be one of the only ones who's going to see it and know about it, because you have decoded this, so only you know. But I found out that the video was posted in the past. And what blew my mind was that the video and the news story towards this AIDS was all about golf. And that was not alluded to in the Q drops. So basically, without me detailing it too much, Q validates the golf gate. And only through my work and these specific Q codes can you see it. But I can prove it now. Q is validating the golf trafficking stuff and the cement trafficking stuff. It's always been there in the Q codes, but people needed the symbolism more than anything to be able to decode it. The esoteric symbolism, the occult symbolism. And a lot of the Q decoders out there are more into like the military side of it, like the dates and when is this going to happen. And that's not important or interesting for me.
Yeah.
Because that's secondary. If it's going to happen, it happened. And then we can look back and see, was it predicted? Well, great, right? It's more important about how the symbolism works and how we can build the map of their because Q says the symbolism is going to be the downfall. And Q has also said that the truth must be discovered organically. They cannot tell us. And it seems to be like some sort of rule to that, in terms of how if this awakening is going to be organic and not steered as a psyop, then we must discover it organically, right?
Yeah. Okay.
So that's okay. Where I'm going to leave it.
You just said a lot of stuff there. So, all right. I'm trying to think up. First of all, this thing about the blood and the plasma is interesting, especially considering we've had a Trump plasma controversy in the last couple of weeks, right? Mm-hmm. And, we always, like, where does all this blood and plasma that people donate go, right? Like, where does it all go? They always have, like, blood drives. Like, remember after the Las Vegas shooting, there was, like, the big blood drive? Why? The people that were dead were already dead and everyone else was alive. Like, why? But when people go and donate blood when they're scared, it's emitting a different frequency or a different sort of hormone, which may be more
Mm.
desirable for some of what you're talking about here.
It actually has to do with the hydrochloroquine, the plasma stuff, and adrenochrome. It all ties together. And it's really, this is what this AIDS thing is about, that Q asked Stringer to decode. This is what it's
Okay.
all about. And it came from the golf stuff, which is,
When you
it's
say,
truly remarkable.
you're saying golf, right? The game golf, not golf like the Gulf of
game,
Mexico. The game golf.
no,
Right?
yeah, but
Yeah,
that's a
okay.
phonetic homophone. The Gulf of Mexico ties into the Gulf
Yeah,
Gate stuff.
yeah.
And that is through the Crenshaw family, if you know that one.
Okay. Like Dan Crenshaw?
Mm-hmm. He's a bad guy.
No, I know. I think that
guy.
in the second hour, I think you and I can have some interesting conversation about how all this connects to Unity 2020 and what's going on there, because I've been observing that for a bit and I have a lot of thoughts about what's going on there. Can you just, the arc of your new work has gone into this heavy focus on Semex and golf, right? Can you just, I know it's hard to do in a little ways, but I'm hoping to pique people's interest so that they can go listen to what you're saying here. How did you get onto this Semex issue? What is its connection to golf, and why is, you sort of said why it's important before you told us how you came across this and what the connection is?
Well, yeah, the first connection I saw was through my Stafford research. That was where it all started. That's 2 years ago, before I was a Q-tard.
What
Let's
research?
say.
What research?
Stafford.
Stafford. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, these fortifications that are shaped as stars that are everywhere.
Stafford. Okay.
And, yeah. And my very good friend, a big shout out to 13th Monkey, who is possibly the most #1 Stafford researcher out there. He's mapped thousands of thousands. I've assisted with, that was what we were spending all our times on 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And we noticed that a lot of places where star forts were supposed to be, that we could see from old maps, now there was a golf course there, or now there was a cement plant there. And we knew that how these Phoenicians, they work in terms of the Tartaria stuff. They see some old Tartary structures, they repurpose them, they Phoeniciify them with, they put plasterwork on top of the facades. They make new facade work to make new symbolism.
Mm-hmm.
And then they repurpose it, and then they love to use how the old Tatars' holy sites with all the electromagnetic ley lines and stuff, they love to make their desecration rituals in these places.
Mm-hmm.
So these old magnificent buildings, they are the spots for the rituals, because that's where you're going to create this energy that's going to mock their ancient enemies. And it's also deeper than that. But that was where it all started, with the golf courses and the star forts. And we knew that when we saw a golf course, well, possibly there could be a star fort or mounds below it, right? Mm-hmm. So we knew implicitly that golf courses could mean tunnels, could mean underground stuff.
Yep.
That was the first thing. So then I fast forward to Q, and I see Semex and how they're putting blood into the concrete. That was something that some of my Tartary research friends were telling me about 2 years before Q.
How did you realize that? How did you realize they were putting blood in the concrete?
Well, my good friend Amaro 2 years ago told me that he showed me the patterns, literally, that they were putting blood to strengthen them. And we were talking about how that could tie in with Tartary research and the red bricks that we see all around us.
Yes.
Now I'm not so sure that all red brick are infused with blood. Don't be worried, but we cannot see on the brick whether there's blood in it. That's the whole thing. But people were taking it too far with the color red and blood and red brick. But that was where I got my keys from. And then 2 years later, I'm into Q. I see the Semex stuff, and then I look up Semex plants, right? And I find some articles about it. A guy, he sends me an article after I go into golf and trafficking, like just on as an investigative journalist. I look up golf stories about where there have been murders, human trafficking, prostitution. There's quite a lot. Like there were some old Cambridge studies that into human trafficking that was talking about how the mafia, especially in Asia, like the big mafia players, they would buy up golf courses and repurposed them as sex tourism spots.
Oh,
So I already knew
wow.
independently that golf courses with elite access was a big mafia magnet for
Mhm.
sex tourism setups,
Mhm.
right? So that in itself, golf could mean sex tourism. And then I knew that Cemex and the concrete plant in themselves could mean clotting concrete and human trafficking. We have already seen the news stories. So I knew that. And then suddenly a guy, he comes and he sends me this article. He says, I couldn't find this article, but after seeing your stuff about golf, I remembered reading this article 2 years ago and I couldn't find it. And then I found out they had censored it. So I had to use the Wayback Machine. And he found this article that showed a guy going on Google Earth and noting all the Cemex locations and how they were basically, the majority of them were neighbors to golf courses. So he was like, what?
Interesting.
Like, so golf courses and concrete plants in many cases are neighbors.
Can I
Like
ask you a
literally,
question?
some even share address.
Can I ask you a
Yeah,
question? Is the Cemex plant that
yeah.
you discovered in Tucson, Arizona, next to a golf course?
I don't think, no, that one is not. So it's not everyone.
Okay.
But if you go into Cemex, California, Long Beach, you'll find 8 golf courses around it. And it's not only golf courses, it's also airports and highways. So you find this pattern of highway, airport, golf course, concrete plant. That is the most common setup. You'll
Mhm.
find other things as well that is not as common, but definitely ties into it.
Mhm.
But the airport and the golf and the concrete plants, those
Okay.
are the big 3.
Okay.
And in Orange County, in Torrance, and in
That's right
California, Long
now,
Beach,
right now where I am. Yeah.
so you have your Cemex plant down at Long Beach. It's a huge one, right?
Okay.
Then you have the Trump golf course a little off the beach, and then you have another golf course down the other way, and you have 2 airports. Yeah, I think you have 3 in the whole area, 1 little and 2 big ones.
Yep.
Those 2 big airports, they have 2 golf courses each as their neighbors. One is a Navy SEAL golf course, and it's also right by SEAL Beach.
Mhm.
And Dan Crenshaw is a Navy SEAL,
Yep.
and the Navy SEALs, they have massive charities playing golf all year. Like they have this Trident Cup even, and that may not be significant for people not knowing that you have charities and golf that could be 2 big red alarms for human trafficking. That is how people need to think now. That's what my work will force you to think about. Not to assume that everybody having a charity to do with golf is a bad guy, but definitely it's a cause to dig if those players are big players or connected to some, scumbags, right? And the Crenshaw family is all about, well, not only golf, but the golf also down at the sea, and politics, law, the maritime side of
Yeah.
it, right? And Navy SEALs, military, especially Navy. And Dan Crenshaw's father is an expert in deep sea operations. It's all about the water.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
his other peoples and other Crenshaws in Texas are involved with water treatment plants. There was another Crenshaw politician who received classified information about the water department in America. There's another Crenshaw who is involved with concrete and with oil drilling. And after Hurricane Harvey, I think in Texas, there were like 3 different Crenshaws that came together independently and helped the city clean up the water situation. It's all about the water with the Crenshaws.
Huh.
And the original bad Crenshaw was a pirate, literally a pirate, like Dan Crenshaw.
Okay. I can
Yeah.
have fun. I
So
can have fun with you all day because that was gonna be. I was gonna go there with the pirate thing. Okay, very good.
yeah,
All right,
yeah.
let's do this. Let's take, because I think like we have like for the people that can follow along, we have sort of a narrative going here. I think let's take a break and move over into the patrons hour. I have some things I'd like to talk to you about tennis. This is a kind of similar thing to golf, right? Tennis, maps. We can talk about maps. I would like to talk to you about deep sea, underwater, maybe even underwater breathers. I'd like to talk to you, yeah, underwater breathers. I'd like to talk to you about hexafluoride layers. I'd like to talk to you about a bunch of interesting stuff that sort of crosses over in a lot of points. So I think we'll switch over to the Patrons Hour now. Before we go, let people know where they can find your work, Victor.
Okay, well, yeah, first and foremost, well, thank you for listening out there. For you not going to go onto the Patriots, shame on you. But you can find me on YouTube, The Bugge Man. I'm heavily shadow banned, so you might need the link. People cannot find me just by searching.
Yeah.
On Twitter, I'm also The Bugge Man, but the Twitter handle is big T and then BUGGE man. But The Bugge Man, you'll find my handle with a boar, it's like a crest with a boar. You know, a wild boar. And yeah, so Twitter and YouTube, and on Facebook, I'm just my legal name, Victor Bugge, BUGGE, and Victor with a C. So yeah, that's where you can find me.
And then the last thing, because you mentioned her a couple of times, can you just tell people where they can find Lavette's work?
Lavette on YouTube. That's just Lavette channel, LAVETTE, Lavette.
Okay. All right, excellent.
Yep.
We're going to move over to the Patrons Hour. You can join us at patreon.com/offplanetmedia. I think this one ought to be a doozy. Jeff Gates will be joining us in the second hour. We will see you guys later. All right.